Footprints of the Forgotten by Edwina Longbottom. Chapter 1. Echoes from the Moors. Dr. Kate Young stood at the edge of the Yorkshire Moors, the rolling mists clinging to her coat as she stepped onto the wet earth. Her boots sank slightly into the peat, each step echoing a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. The landscape before her stretched endlessly, an eerie beauty sculpted by centuries of nature's indifference. Clouds hung low, whispering promises of secrets buried beneath layers of time. Kate was no stranger to discoveries. Her career as a paleontologist had taken her to the deserts of Mongolia and the frozen tundras of Alaska. Yet here, mere miles from her childhood home, a new mystery had called her back. The footprints, if they could be called that, seemed both impossibly ancient and unnervingly fresh. The local archaeological society's phone call had been curt but urgent, their words laced with skepticism and a tremor of hope. Standing beside the first imprint, she crouched, her fingers tracing the edges of the colossal depression. Muddy water pooled within, rippling under the faint drizzle. The size and symmetry of the print defied logic. This wasn't some crude forgery. Whatever had made this had left an impression of authenticity that sent shivers through her. Behind her, voices murmured. Local reporters hovered at a distance, their cameras poised. The buzz of excitement from the scientific community had traveled faster than the morning mist. Kate resisted the urge to glare at them. She wasn't ready for this discovery to become public spectacle. Not yet. Straightening, she gazed across the moors. The heather swayed like a restless tide, its purple hues muted under the overcast sky. Somewhere out there, the answers awaited. But for now, all she had were questions. Questions whispered by the wind and etched into the earth by something larger than imagination. Chapter 2. Shadows over the farms. The weeks following the discovery of the footprints turned the quiet moors into a stage for speculation. In the nearby village of Bramblewick, the usual rhythm of life had been replaced by a steady hum of rumors. Farmers, shopkeepers, and children alike swapped stories over cups of tea and pints of ale. The footprints had disrupted the predictability of the moors, stirring the pot of old legends and breathing life into folklore thought long forgotten. Kate had spent the days since her initial inspection consumed by research. Her small cottage on the village's outskirts had become a makeshift headquarters, its dining table buried under maps, photographs, and soil samples. Despite her attempts to focus on the evidence, whispers from the village reached her ears. Disappearances, livestock gone without a trace, sheep and cattle, integral to the farmers' livelihoods, vanishing as if plucked from the earth. The tension came to a head one cold evening when Kate found herself in the village hall, surrounded by a crowd of anxious townsfolk. The smell of damp wool and wood polish filled the air as the villagers huddled together, their voices a cacophony of frustration and fear. "It's not foxes," Michael Trenton declared, his voice cutting through the din. A stout man with sun-etched features, he radiated the quiet authority of someone who had worked the land his entire life. "Foxes leave tracks, blood. This is different." "Aye," an elderly woman called from the back. "It's like the earth itself is swallowing them." Kate sat at the front, her notebook open but her pen still. She wasn't here to dismiss their stories. These people knew the land intimately, its rhythms, its quirks. If they said something was wrong, she believed them. What unsettled her most were the murmurs about strange sounds in the night. Low, guttural noises that carried on the wind, unlike anything they had heard before. "It could be poachers," she suggested cautiously, breaking her silence. "Or a large predator that's wandered into the area. A rogue bear, perhaps." Laughter rippled through the crowd, though it was tinged with nervousness. Bears hadn't roamed these parts for centuries. "Then explain the footprints," Michael challenged, his piercing gaze fixed on her. Kate didn't have an answer, and the weight of that realization settled uncomfortably in her chest. The footprints were real, the livestock disappearances troubling, and the strange noises undeniable. Something was happening on the moors, and it was growing harder to dismiss as coincidence. The following morning, Kate visited Michael's farm. His fields stretched toward the horizon, bordered by dry stone walls and dotted with tufts of heather. The air smelled of damp earth and manure, a comforting familiarity that belied the unease hanging over the farmstead. "2 sheep last night," Michael said grimly, leading her toward the farthest field. No signs of struggle, no tracks leading away, just gone. Kate crouched by the field's edge, examining the soil. The grass was damp but undisturbed, as though the animals had simply vanished. Nearby, a twisted strand of barbed wire glistened in the pale morning light, its sharp points tangled with tufts of wool. Her pulse quickened. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward the wire. Michael nodded, watching intently as Kate slipped on gloves and carefully removed the wool. It wasn't much, but it was something, a piece of the puzzle that might hold the key to unraveling the mystery. As she worked, a low, mournful sound carried across the moor. Both Kate and Michael froze. The sound wasn't human, nor was it the cry of any animal Kate could name. It seemed to rise from the earth itself, a guttural resonance that sent a shiver down her spine. "What in God's name is that?" Michael whispered. Kate didn't answer. Her gaze swept the horizon, searching for movement among the heather. But the landscape remained still, as though holding its breath. She turned back to Michael, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "We need to set up cameras," she said. "If something's out there, we need to see it." Michael nodded grimly, his earlier skepticism replaced by determination. Together they began planning the surveillance, their resolve fueled by the shared understanding that something ancient or entirely new was stirring on the moors. Chapter 3: The Old Farmer's Tale. Kate's curiosity led her to a solitary figure whose name had been whispered at the village meeting: Terence Wainwright. An old farmer whose family had worked the land for generations, Terence was said to hold an intimate knowledge of the Moors and their secrets. He rarely ventured into the village anymore, living in a crumbling farmhouse perched on the edge of the moors like a sentinel guarding forgotten truths. After a few inquiries, Kate found herself walking a winding path flanked by ancient stone walls, frost glinting in the weak sunlight. Terence's farmhouse emerged from the mist, its slate roof sagging under the weight of time. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a sign of life within the weathered walls. She knocked on the door, the sound echoing in the stillness. Moments later, it creaked open to reveal a man whose age seemed carved into his face. Deep lines traced his brow, and his eyes, though clouded with years, held a sharpness that belied his frailty. "You must be Dr. Young," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Word travels fast in Bramblewick," Kate smiled. "I hear you might have some stories worth sharing." Terence chuckled softly, stepping aside to let her in. "Stories, aye. Some might call 'em nonsense, but you're welcome to judge for yourself." The warmth of the kitchen was a stark contrast to the chill outside. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the air carried the comforting scent of wood smoke and freshly brewed tea. Terence gestured for her to sit, his movements slow but deliberate. He poured her a cup of tea, his hands steady despite their gnarled appearance. For a moment they sat in silence, the only sound the faint crackle of the fire. Then Terence began to speak. "When I was a lad, my father used to tell us about the nights when the moors came alive," he said, his gaze distant, as if seeing the past play out before him. He'd sit by the fire, pipe in hand, and tell us of shadows that moved against the moonlit mist, of calls that carried on the wind, low and mournful, like the land itself was grieving. Kate leaned forward, her notebook forgotten. Terence's words were more than tales. They were fragments of history, handed down through generations. He spoke of nights when livestock would vanish without a trace, much like the events unfolding now, and of footprints, massive, deliberate, etched into the earth. "My father always said they weren't to be feared," Terence continued. "Said they were older than us, part of the land. As long as we didn't disturb their trails, they'd leave us be." "And you believe that?" Kate asked softly. Terence met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Belief has little to do with it, lass. I've seen enough to know there's more out there than we understand." From a nearby drawer, he pulled out a faded map, its edges frayed, and its surface marked with symbols and notations. "This has been in my family for generations," he said, laying it on the table. "It marks the places where my ancestors saw them." Kate traced the map with her fingertips, her excitement tempered by the weight of its significance. The markings aligned with the areas where the footprints had been found, forming a pattern that suggested deliberate movement. This wasn't random. It was a trail, a story told through time and space. "What are these symbols?" she asked. They're what my father called the safe paths, Terence replied. Places where the ground is firm and the mist doesn't cling. He said if you stay on those paths, you'll be safe. Kate felt a thrill of discovery mingled with unease. This map was more than a relic. It was a key, a guide to navigating the moors and perhaps uncovering their secrets. "Do you think these creatures are still out there?" she asked. Terence didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared into the fire, his expression thoughtful. "If they are, they're not here to harm us," he said at last. "But that doesn't mean they'll tolerate us poking about." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, Kate knew she had found more than she had hoped for. Terence's tales and his map were pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. She left the farmhouse with a promise to return, her mind racing with possibilities. That night, as she spread the map across her dining table, she felt the pull of the moors stronger than ever. The answers she sought lay beyond the village, in the shadowed paths and ancient trails marked by Terence's ancestors, and she was determined to follow them. Chapter 4: Silent Witness. Kate couldn't shake the feeling of inevitability as she stared at the map Terence had entrusted to her. The faded lines and symbols whispered promises of discovery, but also warnings of what might lie ahead. Determined to uncover the truth, she sought help from someone who knew the moors as intimately as Terence did. Emma Harding, a local wildlife expert who had spent her life studying the rhythms of this rugged land. Emma was a striking woman, her weathered features reflecting a life spent outdoors. Her sharp, observant eyes contrasted with her warm demeanor. When Kate approached her with the map and the tale of the footprints, Emma's skepticism was tempered by a quiet curiosity. "The moors have their own heartbeat," Emma said as she traced a finger over the map's symbols. "If something unusual is out there, the land will tell us, but it doesn't give up its secrets easily." Together, they decided to venture into the moors, guided by Terence's map and the clues it held. The morning of their expedition dawned cold and gray, the mist curling around their boots as they set off. Kate carried her field kit, while Emma brought binoculars, a camera, and a notebook filled with years of observations. The landscape was eerily quiet. The usual calls of skylarks and the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush were absent, replaced by a heavy stillness that pressed against their senses. It felt as if the moors were holding their breath, waiting. "Unusual, isn't it?" Emma murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "This kind of silence, it's not natural." Kate nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. Every step felt deliberate, the squelch of their boots on the damp earth, a reminder of their intrusion into this timeless expanse. Using the map, they navigated toward the first marked location, a natural hollow shielded by a stand of ancient trees. As they approached, the air grew colder, and the mist thickened, creating an almost otherworldly atmosphere. The hollow seemed untouched by time, its edges lined with moss and heather. "This is it," Kate said, her voice tight with anticipation. They paused at the edge of the hollow, taking in its eerie beauty. The ground sloped gently downward, and at its center lay a series of depressions, faint but unmistakable. Kate crouched beside one, brushing away the thin layer of moss that had begun to reclaim it. The shape was familiar, another massive footprint similar to the ones she had first discovered. Emma knelt beside her, running her fingers lightly over the impression. "This is extraordinary," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "Whatever made this, it's not something we've documented before." Kate took measurements, her hands steady despite the thrill coursing through her. The dimensions matched the previous prints exactly. This wasn't a coincidence. It was evidence. Evidence of something that defied explanation. As they worked, a low rumble reverberated through the air. Both women froze, their eyes locking. The sound was deep and resonant, more felt than heard. It seemed to emanate from the earth itself, a guttural vibration that made the hair on the back of Kate's neck stand on end. "What is that?" she whispered. Emma shook her head, her face pale. "I don't know, but we need to be careful." The sound faded, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. Kate and Emma exchanged a glance, both feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. "We should document as much as we can and head back before dark," Emma suggested. Kate nodded, though a part of her itched to press on. The footprints, the rumble, everything was pointing toward a deeper mystery, one that lay further ahead. By the time they returned to the village, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting the moors in shades of gold and shadow. Kate's mind raced with possibilities, her notebook filled with observations and sketches. Emma, though quieter, shared her sense of urgency. "We need to return," Kate said as they parted ways. "This is just the beginning." Emma agreed, her gaze drifting back toward the moors. "Whatever's out there, it's not just a story anymore. It's real, and we're going to find it." As night fell, Kate sat by the fire in her cottage, studying the map once more. The hollow was just one of many locations marked, each one a potential piece of the puzzle. The moors, with their silent witness and hidden truths, held more than she had dared to imagine, and she was determined to uncover it all, no matter the cost. Chapter 5: The Valley of Life. Kate and Emma set out early the next morning, the cold air biting at their faces as the moors stretched endlessly before them. Guided by Terence's map, they ventured farther than before, crossing terrain that seemed to grow wilder with each step. The mist hung heavier here, weaving through the heather like a spectral veil. It was a place untouched by time, where nature's secrets lay cloaked in silence. The trail led them to a ridge bordered by jagged rocks and dense underbrush. As they crested the ridge, the landscape before them transformed. Below lay a valley unlike anything they had seen on the moors, a lush, vibrant expanse teeming with life. Sunlight broke through the clouds, casting golden rays on an explosion of greenery. Vibrant flowers bloomed in clusters, their colors vivid against the deep emerald of the grass. The air was thick with the earthy scent of damp soil and foliage, a stark contrast to the barren moors above. This isn't possible," Emma murmured, her voice tinged with awe. She crouched at the edge of the ridge, peering down at the thriving ecosystem. "It's like stepping into another world." Kate was speechless. The valley was alive with movement and sound. Birds with iridescent feathers flitted between trees, their calls echoing in the still air. Insects buzzed around blooms that seemed almost prehistoric in their size and structure. Streams wound through the landscape like silver ribbons, their waters clear and shimmering. The two women descended carefully, the terrain growing softer underfoot as they neared the valley floor. Each step brought new discoveries: ferns as tall as trees, plants with leaves so large they could shelter a person, and vines that draped gracefully from ancient branches. "It's like evolution hit pause here," Kate said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This place, it doesn't belong to our time." As they moved deeper into the valley, the sense of otherness grew stronger. The sounds of the outside world, wind, distant birds, faded, replaced by an almost reverent stillness. It was as if the valley had been waiting for them, its secrets held in trust by the encircling cliffs. Near the heart of the valley, they came upon a grove of trees that seemed to pulse with life. Their bark was smooth and dark, their branches heavy with fruits unlike any Kate had seen. The air here was thick, almost humid, and carried a faint, sweet aroma. "This ecosystem is entirely self-contained," Emma observed, her scientific mind racing to make sense of what she was seeing. "It's thriving without interference from the outside world." Kate's gaze swept the grove, lingering on a series of depressions in the soft earth. She approached cautiously, her breath catching as she realized what they were: more footprints. These were fresher, the edges crisp and undisturbed. "They've been here," she said, pointing to the tracks. "Recently." Emma knelt beside her, tracing the edge of one print with a trembling finger. "They're massive," she said. "Whatever made these, it's still here." A sudden rustling in the underbrush made them both freeze. The sound was faint but deliberate, the movements too purposeful to be the wind. They exchanged a glance, their unspoken thoughts mirrored in each other's eyes. Something or someone was watching them. "Stay calm," Emma whispered, her voice steady despite the tension in her posture. "We don't want to startle it." Kate nodded, her heart pounding as the rustling grew louder. She scanned the shadows, searching for the source of the noise. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the dense foliage, a figure emerged. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Standing on two legs, its body was covered in rough, mottled scales that shimmered faintly in the dappled sunlight. Its head, crowned with a crest of spines, turned toward them, its golden eyes reflecting an intelligence that sent a shiver down Kate's spine. "It's real," Emma whispered, her voice trembling with awe and fear. "It's actually real." The creature regarded them for a moment, its gaze unblinking, before turning and retreating into the forest with a grace that belied its size. The underbrush swallowed it whole, leaving the two women standing in stunned silence. "We need to document this," Kate said finally, her voice shaky but resolute. "Whatever this place is, it's beyond anything we could have imagined." Emma nodded, already reaching for her camera. They spent hours exploring the valley, capturing images and taking detailed notes. Every discovery only deepened the mystery, evidence of a thriving ecosystem untouched by time, a world preserved in perfect isolation. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the valley, Kate and Emma knew they had to leave. The journey back would be treacherous in the dark, and they couldn't risk disturbing the delicate balance of this hidden paradise. As they climbed back to the ridge, the valley seemed to fade into the mist, its vibrant colors muted by the encroaching twilight. Kate paused at the top, her gaze lingering on the verdant expanse below. She felt a deep sense of connection to the place, as if it had chosen to reveal itself to her. "This changes everything," she said softly. Emma placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression a mixture of wonder and determination. "It's not just about what we found," she said. "It's about how we protect it." With that, they turned back toward the moors, the weight of their discovery settling heavily on their shoulders. The valley had given them a glimpse of a world long forgotten, but it had also entrusted them with a responsibility, a duty to preserve its secrets and protect its fragile existence. Chapter 6: Glimpses of Giants. The following morning, Kate and Emma returned to the valley, their anticipation tempered by the weight of responsibility. Armed with cameras, notebooks, and recording equipment, they descended into the mist-shrouded sanctuary, careful to tread lightly. The valley seemed to pulse with life, its vibrant ecosystem radiating an energy that neither of them could ignore. As they approached the grove where they had seen the tracks the previous day, the air grew thick with tension. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the chirp of an unseen bird, seemed amplified. The footprints from yesterday were still there, fresh and unaltered, a silent testimony to the presence of something extraordinary. "Do you feel that?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of insects. "Like we're being watched?" Kate nodded, her eyes scanning the dense underbrush. The valley was alive in ways that defied explanation, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were intruding on something sacred. Suddenly, a low rumble reverberated through the ground, more felt than heard. Kate froze, her breath catching in her throat. Emma, crouched beside her, gripped her arm tightly. "Over there," Emma whispered, pointing toward a clearing just beyond the grove. They crept forward, careful not to make a sound. The clearing opened before them, bathed in dappled sunlight. At first, the scene seemed almost serene, a crystal-clear pool of water surrounded by lush vegetation. But then Kate saw them. Dinosaurs. Real, living dinosaurs. A small herd of herbivores grazed near the water's edge, their massive forms casting long shadows in the golden light. Their scales glistened like polished stone, and their movements were slow and deliberate, each step sending ripples through the ground. Among them were creatures resembling sauropods, their long necks reaching high into the trees, and smaller bird-like creatures darting between their legs. Kate's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Emma, beside her, was equally stunned, her eyes wide with disbelief. This is impossible," Emma breathed. "They're supposed to be extinct." "And yet here they are," Kate whispered, her voice trembling with awe. "We're looking at a piece of history that shouldn't exist." They watched in silence as the creatures moved about, completely unaware of their presence. The herbivores grazed on the lush vegetation, their massive jaws crunching leaves and branches with ease. Nearby, a group of smaller dinosaurs, raptor-like but less menacing, chased each other playfully, their high-pitched calls echoing through the clearing. Kate fumbled for her camera, her hands shaking as she adjusted the lens. She snapped photo after photo, each one a testament to the miracle before her. Emma followed suit, her own camera clicking softly in the still air. "Do you see how they interact?" Emma murmured, her scientific mind already analyzing the scene. There's a hierarchy here, a structure. They're part of an ecosystem. Kate nodded, her gaze fixed on the creatures. It's like evolution paused here, preserving this moment in time. But the peaceful tableau was soon interrupted. From the far side of the clearing, a shadow emerged, a predator. Its sleek, muscular body moved with a deadly grace, its eyes locked on the herd. The herbivores tensed, their movements growing agitated. A low warning call rippled through the group as they began to retreat toward the water. "It's hunting," Emma whispered, her voice taut with tension. The predator, a raptor, though larger and more menacing than any they had imagined, stalked closer, its claws glinting in the sunlight. It was a living embodiment of danger, a reminder that this valley was not just a paradise, but a place of primal survival. Kate's heart raced as she and Emma crouched lower, hoping to avoid detection. The predator lunged, its speed and precision breathtaking. The smallest herbivore, a young sauropod, let out a panicked cry as it was cornered. But before the raptor could strike, a massive adult stepped forward, swinging its tail with astonishing force. The predator hissed, retreating into the shadows. The valley fell silent once more, the balance of power restored. Kate exhaled a shaky breath, her mind racing. The scene they had just witnessed was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. This wasn't just a glimpse of the past, it was a living, breathing world, complete with its own rules and rhythms. "We can't let anyone find this place," Emma said firmly, her voice breaking the silence. "If the world knew about this, it would destroy everything." Kate nodded, her resolve hardening. "But we can't ignore it either. This changes everything we know about history, about biology, about life itself." They retreated from the clearing, their thoughts heavy with the implications of their discovery. Back at the ridge, Kate turned to Emma, her expression serious. "We need a plan," she said, "to protect this place and to understand it." Emma agreed, her gaze drifting back toward the valley. "We'll need help, discreet, trustworthy help, and we'll need to tread carefully." As they made their way back to the village, the weight of their discovery settled heavily on their shoulders. They had witnessed the impossible, but with it came a responsibility they hadn't anticipated. The valley, with its glimpses of giants and echoes of a forgotten world, was a secret they were now sworn to protect. Chapter 7: Predators and Prey. The days that followed were a whirlwind of planning and cautious exploration. Kate and Emma found themselves drawn back to the valley repeatedly, each visit revealing new facets of its complex ecosystem. Yet with each discovery came a growing sense of unease. The balance of life in the valley was as delicate as the mist that clung to its edges, and their presence, however well-intentioned, was an intrusion. It became clear early on that the valley was not just a sanctuary, but also a battleground. The harmony they had observed during their first visit was maintained by an intricate web of predator and prey relationships, each species playing a critical role in the ecosystem. The herbivores, though massive and seemingly invincible, lived under constant threat from the predators lurking in the shadows. Kate and Emma spent hours observing the valley from concealed vantage points, their journals filling with sketches and notes. They documented everything: the behavior of the herbivores, the hunting strategies of the predators, and even the subtle changes in the environment. The raptors, which they had initially feared, proved to be both fascinating and terrifying. Agile and cunning, they moved through the underbrush like living shadows, their presence a constant reminder of the valley's primal nature. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the valley in hues of amber and crimson, Kate and Emma witnessed a scene that left them both breathless. A pack of raptors had cornered a young herbivore, its plaintive cries echoing across the clearing. The adult herbivores, though protective, seemed reluctant to intervene, their massive forms shifting uneasily. "It's survival," Emma murmured, her voice heavy with resignation. "The predators keep the population in check. Without them, the valley would collapse under its own weight." Kate nodded, her eyes fixed on the scene. "It's brutal, but it's necessary. This is what balance looks like." As the raptors moved in for the kill, the clearing erupted in chaos. One of the adults charged, its massive tail sweeping through the air like a battering ram. The raptors scattered, their sharp cries cutting through the dusk. The young herbivore limped away, its life spared, for now. The display of raw power and survival instinct left both women shaken. It was a stark reminder that the valley, for all its beauty, was not a place of peace. It was a microcosm of life's harsh realities, preserved in a state of perpetual struggle. The next morning, Kate and Emma gathered their notes, determined to piece together a comprehensive understanding of the valley's ecosystem. They sketched food chains, noted behavioral patterns, and even began mapping the predators' hunting grounds. But as their understanding grew, so did their concerns. "This place isn't just a relic of the past," Kate said as she studied their sketches. "It's a living, breathing system, and it's vulnerable." Emma nodded, her brow furrowed. "If anything disrupts this balance, whether it's us, other humans, or even a natural event, it could collapse." Their fears were not unfounded. During one of their excursions, they discovered signs that the predators had begun venturing beyond the valley. Faint tracks in the mud near the moor's edge suggested that hunger or curiosity was driving them into new territory. This revelation sent a chill down Kate's spine. "If they're moving beyond the valley, the local farmers are at risk," Emma said, her tone grim. "And so are the predators. If someone sees one of these creatures, their first instinct will be to kill it." Kate sighed, rubbing her temples. "We're walking a tightrope here. If we reveal the valley's existence, we risk destroying it. But if we stay silent, the creatures might wander into the human world, and that could be disastrous for everyone." The ethical dilemma weighed heavily on both women. The valley was a marvel of nature, a window into a forgotten time. But it was also a fragile ecosystem that could be upended by the smallest disturbance. Protecting it meant making difficult choices, and neither Kate nor Emma felt entirely equipped to make them. One evening, as they sat by the fire in Kate's cottage, the weight of their discovery pressed heavily on them. Emma stared into the flames, her expression pensive. "What do we do, Kate?" she asked quietly. "How do we protect something this big, this important?" Kate didn't answer immediately. She stared at the map spread out on the table, her mind racing. Terrence's words echoed in her memory. "They've been here longer than us. They're part of the land." "We start small," Kate said finally. "We work with the locals, like Terrence, to create a boundary around the valley, a safe zone that keeps both the creatures and the villagers protected." Emma looked skeptical. "And what about the government? Or other scientists? You know we can't keep this a secret forever." Kate met her gaze, her eyes steely. "One step at a time. For now, we keep it quiet. The valley has survived this long without interference. If we're careful, we can give it the protection it needs." Emma nodded slowly, though the doubt in her eyes remained. The path ahead was fraught with challenges, but it was the only way forward. Together, they would navigate the delicate balance between preservation and discovery, knowing that the valley's fate, and perhaps their own, hung in the balance. Chapter 8: The Cost of Secrecy. The weight of the valley's secret hung heavy on Kate and Emma as they stood in the village hall. The room was filled with familiar faces, farmers, shopkeepers, and lifelong residents of Bramblewick. Their expressions ranged from curious to concerned, but a quiet tension bound them all. The whispered rumors of disappearing livestock and strange sightings had reached a boiling point. Kate stepped forward, the map Terrence had given her tucked under her arm. Emma stood at her side, her calm presence a source of reassurance. "Thank you all for coming," Kate began, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. "I know the past few weeks have been unsettling. Strange footprints, missing livestock, and sounds we can't explain. But Emma and I have uncovered something that might explain what's happening." The room murmured with anticipation, but Kate pressed on. "Beyond the moors lies a hidden valley," she said. "It's unlike anything we've ever seen, a place untouched by time where creatures long thought extinct still roam." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Michael Trenton, the stout farmer who had spoken up at the last meeting, narrowed his eyes. "You're saying dinosaurs are out there?" he asked skeptically. "That they're the ones taking our sheep?" Kate nodded. "We believe some of the predators have ventured beyond the valley in search of food. They're not hunting out of malice, they're following their instincts. But this is a delicate situation, for them and for us." Another voice cut through the room, this time an older woman seated near the front. "If this is true, why not tell the authorities? Why keep it a secret? Emma stepped forward, her voice firm. Because if we do, we risk destroying everything. The valley has survived this long because it's been hidden. If the world knew about it, scientists, tourists, and governments would descend upon it. The creatures, the ecosystem, it wouldn't survive the disruption. Michael crossed his arms. And what about us? Our livestock? Our livelihoods? You're asking us to keep this secret while these things roam free. Kate nodded, understanding his frustration. We're not asking you to ignore the danger. That's why we're here, to work together to protect both the valley and the village. We need your help to create boundaries to ensure these creatures stay in their habitat. The room fell into a tense silence as the villagers exchanged glances. Finally, Terence Wainwright spoke from the back, his voice carrying the weight of generations. The Moors have always held secrets, he said. My family's lived here for centuries, and we've learned to coexist with what we don't understand. If what Dr. Young says is true, then it's our duty to protect this land and everything on it. His words seemed to shift the mood in the room. Slowly, heads began to nod, and the tension eased. Michael sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. All right, he said grudgingly. But if we're doing this, we need a plan. Something that keeps our families and animals safe. Over the next few days, Kate and Emma worked closely with the villagers to put that plan into action. Terrence's map became the foundation of their strategy, guiding them as they marked out safe zones and pathways to discourage the creatures from wandering too far. Fences were reinforced, and subtle markers, stones, ropes, and natural barriers, were placed to guide the animals back to the valley. The villagers formed a watch group, taking shifts to patrol the moors and keep an eye out for any signs of the creatures. Emma provided training, teaching them how to observe without interfering, and how to respond if they encountered one of the predators. This isn't about fighting them, she reminded the group during a training session. It's about coexistence. If we understand their patterns, we can avoid conflict. Despite the progress, the strain of secrecy weighed heavily on everyone. Keeping the valley hidden meant withholding the truth from the outside world, a burden that grew heavier with each passing day. Some villagers questioned whether they were doing the right thing, their unease simmering beneath the surface. One evening, Kate and Emma sat with Terence in his farmhouse, their exhaustion evident. The old farmer poured them each a mug of tea, his steady hands a reminder of the resilience they needed to muster. You've done well, both of you, Terence said, his voice low. But secrets have a way of unraveling. Sooner or later, someone will find that valley. Kate stared into her tea, the weight of his words settling over her. I know, she admitted, but for now, it's the only way. If we reveal it now, it'll be chaos. The valley won't survive. Terence nodded, though his expression remained somber. Then you'd best prepare for what comes next. The strain of maintaining the secret came to a head one stormy night. A group of raptors ventured beyond the safe zone, drawn by the scent of livestock. The villagers acted swiftly, herding the animals to safety, while Emma and Kate worked to guide the predators back toward the valley. The incident left the community shaken, but strengthened their resolve. It was a reminder of the fragile balance they were trying to maintain, and the risks they faced if they failed. As the storm passed and calm returned to the moors, Kate stood at the edge of the valley, staring into the mist. She thought of the creatures she had seen, the beauty and danger they represented, and the responsibility that had fallen on her shoulders. This can't last forever, she said softly, more to herself than to Emma, who stood beside her. No, Emma agreed, but for now, it's enough. Chapter 9. Alliance and Conservation Weeks turned into months, and the tenuous alliance between the villagers, Kate, and Emma grew stronger. The valley had become more than a secret. It was a shared responsibility, a fragile treasure that united the community in ways they hadn't expected. Together, they crafted a conservation strategy designed to protect both the valley and the people living on its borders. Kate's small cottage became the hub of their efforts. Maps, sketches, and field notes covered every surface as she and Emma worked tirelessly to document the valley's ecosystem. They compiled detailed reports on the creatures' movements, their hunting habits, and the delicate interplay between predator and prey. The goal wasn't just to understand the valley, it was to preserve it. The villagers played their part with quiet determination. Under Terrence's guidance, they reinforced the valley's natural boundaries, using subtle barriers to guide the creatures away from human settlements. These measures were simple but effective. Fallen trees strategically placed to block paths, trenches filled with water to deter predators, and rows of heather replanted to create visual deterrence. The watch group, initially skeptical, became an integral part of the plan. Farmers took turns patrolling the moors, their keen eyes scanning for signs of movement. They carried whistles instead of weapons, their goal to observe and redirect rather than confront. It was a delicate balance, but one that seemed to hold. Emma's expertise proved invaluable. She organized workshops, teaching the villagers how to recognize the creature's tracks and behaviors. She emphasized non-invasive methods of coexistence, drawing on her years of experience studying wildlife. "We're not here to fight them," she reminded the group during one evening meeting. "We're here to live alongside them." The villagers listened, their initial doubts tempered by a growing respect for the valley and its inhabitants. The fear that had gripped Bramblewick in those first weeks had given way to a quiet resolve, a collective understanding that they were stewards of something extraordinary. But the valley's survival depended on more than fences and patrols. Kate knew they needed external support, funding, expertise, and resources to sustain their efforts. This posed a new challenge: how to secure help without revealing the valley's true nature. After weeks of deliberation, Kate and Emma devised a plan. They would present the valley as an ecological reserve, a protected area of outstanding natural beauty. By focusing on its flora and fauna, they could attract government funding and scientific interest without drawing attention to the creatures that lived within. Terrence, ever pragmatic, helped them draft the proposal. His knowledge of the land and its history lent credibility to their efforts, while Emma's detailed ecological assessments provided the necessary scientific backing. "We don't need to lie," Emma said as they finalized the paperwork. "We just need to focus on the parts of the truth that won't attract too much attention." The proposal was submitted quietly, its language carefully crafted to avoid raising suspicions. Weeks later, they received the news they had been waiting for. The government had approved their request. The valley was officially designated a conservation area, its borders protected under strict environmental laws. The funding that followed allowed them to expand their efforts. They hired additional wildlife experts, installed monitoring equipment, and created educational programs for the villagers. The valley's existence remained a closely guarded secret, but its preservation was now a collaborative effort. Despite their progress, the pressure of secrecy weighed heavily on Kate and Emma. The fear of discovery was a constant shadow, and the knowledge that they were withholding something monumental gnawed at them both. One evening, as they walked the valley's perimeter, Emma voiced the question that had been haunting them. "How long do you think we can keep this up?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Kate sighed, her shoulders slumping under the weight of the question. "I don't know," she admitted. "But every day we keep this place safe is a victory." Emma nodded, though the doubt in her eyes remained. What happens if someone stumbles upon it, or if the creatures venture too far? Kate didn't have an answer. The valley's survival depended on its isolation, but isolation was a fragile defense. One wrong step, a careless visitor, a curious journalist, a predator wandering too far, and the secret could unravel. The test of their resolve came sooner than they expected. One crisp morning, a group of hikers strayed off the marked trails, venturing dangerously close to the valley's edge. Kate and Emma were alerted by one of the patrols and raced to intercept them. They arrived just in time to see the hikers peering into the mist-filled expanse, their curiosity piqued by the strange sounds emanating from within. "Beautiful spot, isn't it?" Kate said, her tone light as she approached the group. "But this area is protected. We're asking people to stick to the marked paths to avoid disturbing the wildlife." The hikers, startled but cooperative, nodded and allowed Kate and Emma to guide them back to safety. As they walked, one of the men glanced over his shoulder. "Thought I saw something moving down there," he said casually. "Big, too." Kate forced a smile. "Probably a deer," she said. "They're plentiful around here." The encounter left her shaken. It was a stark reminder of how quickly their carefully maintained secrecy could crumble. As she and Emma returned to the valley, the reality of their situation loomed larger than ever. "We need to tighten security," Kate said grimly. "No more close calls." Emma agreed, her expression resolute. "The valley's counting on us." As the months stretched into years, the valley remained a sanctuary, its secrets nested within the hearts of those sworn to protect it. The villagers, once fearful and fragmented, found cohesion through their shared cause. And Kate and Emma, though burdened by the weight of their responsibility, found purpose in their role as guardians. But the question lingered. How long could they hold the line? The valley's existence was a fragile miracle, and miracles, by their nature, were fleeting. Chapter 10: Guardians of the Land. The years passed quietly, but the weight of the valley's secret never lessened. For Kate, the valley had become more than a discovery. It was a part of her identity, a connection to something larger than herself. Its existence had changed her, as it had changed the villagers who now shared its guardianship. On a clear spring morning, Kate stood at the edge of the valley, gazing down at the mist that still clung to its depths. The air was cool, and the sun cast long shadows over the rolling hills. She had walked this path countless times, yet each visit filled her with the same sense of awe and responsibility. Behind her, Emma approached, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. She carried a small satchel filled with notes, photographs, and sketches, years of observations and data meticulously recorded. "It still feels like stepping into another world," Emma said, her voice filled with quiet reverence. Kate nodded, her gaze lingering on the verdant expanse below. "It's a world that shouldn't exist," she said. "And yet, here it is." They descended into the valley together, their footsteps careful and deliberate. The air grew warmer as they neared the floor, the sounds of life rising to meet them. Birds with iridescent feathers darted between ancient trees, their calls echoing like music. The ground was soft and damp, carpeted with moss and wildflowers. The valley's inhabitants were as vibrant as ever. Herbivores grazed in small herds, their massive forms moving with surprising grace. Predators lingered in the shadows, their sharp eyes ever watchful. It was a world of constant motion and balance, a living tapestry of survival and interdependence. Emma paused to take a photograph of a sauropod grazing near the edge of a stream. The creature lifted its head briefly, its massive eyes meeting hers before returning to its meal. It was a moment of quiet connection, a reminder of the shared existence they had been entrusted to protect. Later, as they sat by the crystal-clear pool at the heart of the valley, Kate pulled out a worn journal and began to write. The pages were filled with years of notes, discoveries, observations, and reflections. It was her way of preserving the valley's story, even if the world might never read it. Emma watched her for a moment before speaking. "Do you ever wonder what will happen when we're gone? When it's someone else's turn to protect this place?" Kate looked up, her pen pausing mid-sentence. The question had haunted her often, especially as the years passed and the weight of responsibility grew heavier. "I think about it all the time," she admitted. "But I also know we've built something here, something that will last. The villagers, the watch group, the conservation efforts, they're all part of the legacy. The valley isn't just ours anymore. It belongs to everyone who's sworn to protect it." Emma nodded, her expression thoughtful. "But secrets have a way of slipping out," she said softly. "And when they do, the world will come for this place." Kate sighed, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. "Maybe," she said, "but for now the valley is safe, and as long as it's safe, we've done our job." The valley's story was one of resilience and balance, of life thriving against the odds. It was a story that Kate and Emma had become a part of, not as conquerors or explorers, but as caretakers. Their role was not to claim it, but to protect it, to ensure that its secrets remained hidden and its inhabitants undisturbed. As they made their way back to the ridge, the sun began to set, casting the valley in hues of gold and amber. The mist rose slowly, shrouding the landscape in an ethereal glow. It was a sight that never failed to take Kate's breath away, a reminder of why they had fought so hard to keep the valley hidden. At the top of the ridge, Kate turned to look back one last time. The valley lay silent and serene, its beauty untouched by time. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that, for now, it would remain as it was, a sanctuary, a mystery, a living connection to a forgotten past. "This isn't the end," she said softly, more to herself than to Emma. "It's just another chapter." Emma placed a hand on her shoulder, her expression filled with quiet determination. "And we'll keep writing it," she said, "for as long as we can." Together they turned and walked away, leaving the valley behind but carrying its echoes with them. It was a place that defied explanation, a testament to the resilience of life and the power of secrecy. And though the future was uncertain, one truth remained: the valley would endure as long as there were those willing to protect it. Epilogue. Years later, as Kate sat by the fire in her cottage, she reflected on the choices they had made. The valley had remained hidden, its secrets safe for another generation. She glanced at the journal on her lap, its pages filled with the story of a place that shouldn't exist. The world outside clamored for answers, for discoveries, for progress. But some secrets, she realized, were meant to be kept. The valley wasn't just a scientific marvel. It was a reminder of what could be preserved when humanity chose stewardship over conquest. And so, as the fire crackled softly and the wind whispered through the moors, Kate smiled. The valley's story was far from over. It lived on in the hearts of those who had walked its paths, in the whispers of the villagers who protected its borders, and in the eternal dance of life within its misty embrace.